The PSBA is committed to diversity, inclusion, and equity work. As an organization based in Tacoma, Washington, we acknowledge the Puyallup tribe and invite you to visit the official website of the Puyallup and listen to their land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional homelands of the Puyallup tribe. The Puyallup people have lived on and stewarded these lands since the beginning of time and continue to do so today. We recognize that this land acknowledgement is one small step towards true allyship, and we commit to uplifting the voices, experiences, and histories of the Indigenous people of this land and beyond.
Thank you so much, Lori, and welcome everyone to our Thursday, April Zoom lunchtime conversation. First of all, Lori, I just want to say how much everybody enjoyed your presentation last week. And to those of you that are new to our Zoom conversations, please know that our presentations are recorded and can be easily found by going to Google and just searching under PSBA Media YouTube. And you'll be taken to a site where you'll find over 38 videos of artist talks that we've been hosting over the last 4 years. So it's a great resource. Today, it's a pleasure to welcome all of you and to kick off, in sorts, as we began a new series of conversations about color in art, from origins and history to the impact on a work of art. And I am so delighted to be introducing Suzanne Moore, a very familiar face to many of us in PSBA, an incredible artist, calligrapher, and PSBA member who will be sharing the spotlight today and in future sessions with me. Suzanne brings her experience, her depth of knowledge, and insights, and her conversation will be highlighting and introducing our speaker today. She's also going to be facilitating future sessions, which we'll talk about. So I'm going to hand over to Suzanne to introduce our fabulous and very colorful lunchtime speaker.
Thank you, Jen, and welcome everyone. I learned about Heidi Gustafson in a search for books about color. And when Jane and I talked about the PSBA lunchtime conversations, we settled on the theme of color to span the years. So Heidi's book, The Book of Earth, seemed to be the perfect way to open the series. Her multifaceted journey takes us into a world of the most ancient colors, into deep history, spirituality, chemistry, and the possibilities of ochre, pigment, and raw color. Her book, The Book of Earth, is the story of her passion for these ancient elemental pigments, her dedication to artistic research, her gratitude for the wisdom of ochre and the Council of Elders, her experimentation, contemplation, and conversation. Heidi is a graduate of the Maryland Institute College of Art. She studied forensic science, which I thought was fascinating, at the University of Baltimore, and holds an MA in philosophy and religion from the California Institute of Integral Studies. Her integration of scientific, artistic, and spiritual practices is evident in her creation of an archive and sanctuary for over 900 ochres and earth pigments from 7 continents, more than 50 countries. She lives on Whidbey Island. We're lucky in that. And Heidi writes, "To me, ochre is family and kin, a profound guide, companion, and ancestor, a supernatural material." Thank you, Heidi, and I so look forward to your story.
Aw, that's awesome. Thanks for introducing me like that. And it's funny to hear myself quoted to myself. That's great. Yeah, it's awesome to be here. This is a treat for me because I've never got to have lunch with a bunch of book art, I'm assuming nerds, but just people in this world. And yeah, I'm really stoked to get to talk to you all as opposed to a lot of the other kinds of artists I've had the opportunity to talk with. So my Like Suzanne said, I kind of came with the idea just to move through the contents of this book, but also sort of the premise of the book and images from the book, ideas from the book. But also because it's you all here, I really wanted for us and for myself to explore the original Book of Earth, which has no words, has only pigments. And I'm going to talk about both of these together and sort of the process of how I moved from this ochre book to a commercial book and all that's inside of that, along with the stories of ochres. That's my thought. I think before I kind of dive in, I similarly want to acknowledge the land that I'm on. So I'm sitting here, yes, on Whidbey Island, but I also live above a place called Bucho, which is the Lushootseed name for the shoreline and the beach here. And I currently live right across the water from where I was born. And it's on the traditional food gathering and homelands of several Coast Salish tribes, including Snohomish, Snoqualmie, the Upper and Lower Skagit, and the Tulalip tribes, and many allied tribes and bands that signed the 1855 Treaty of Point Elliott. So as a non-native person who listens to and serves the land, like that's my vocation, is to work with the earth and the manifold spirits that reside in the land. I have been working really hard. I don't think I've worked hard enough, but I want to keep trying to center, support, and learn from the Indigenous women of this land who are actively working to protect the earth and protecting the ochres. So just for example, like you mentioned, going to the Puyallup website to learn more about them, I would recommend listening to the podcast All My Relations, which is hosted by Matika Wilbur, and it's run out of Tidelands, which is an Indigenous-led gallery in Seattle. It's a great space. The podcast is amazing. They talk all about different issues that are really important for us here in the Northwest and everywhere. It's a great way to learn how to be a better guest on this land. So yeah, that's what I want to kind of start with. But I also want to acknowledge an individual person who's been really significant in how I've learned a lot of the knowledge. She helped me with Book of Earth. She edited it, and she's one of my closest mentors and collaborators. Her name's Melanie Anchetta, and she runs Native Paint Revealed. So it looks at a lot of the Northwest Coast Indigenous pigment history. But she also founded this amazing nonprofit called Pigments Revealed International. They have a website. They do similar things like what we're doing here. They do talks once a month about different themes, and they have a ton of resources on pigments. So if you want to learn a lot more practical stuff that I might not cover today, they're a great resource. And she's an amazing woman who's I just have to shout out before I start anything. Yeah, so like I said, I want to talk about my two books. And on the right is the official one, Book of Earth, A Guide to Ochre, Pigment, and Raw Color. And it was put out by Abrams. I worked with their design team in-house for that project. And then on the left is my personal artist book that was more my own personal exploration of the ochres. And they're only from the Cascade region, what you're seeing on the left there. So every page in that book I showed you is from our area. And it's just, like both of these books, they're both attempts to translate the voices of ochre, their places, their rocks, the geology of them, the soils that they come from, but also their stories, what they carry, the place stories, the people stories, the spirit stories, and also their material powers and their significance as, like Suzanne said, as historical, very significant cultural items in our lives as humans. So that is not easy to do, to translate the voices of rocks. It's something I don't know if either of these books are really successful. So maybe we can chat about it at the end, like what parts, what does that mean to translate rocks? How do we go about doing that? What does that mean in our practices? But anyways, I know I was invited here more about color than geology. So, but I do want to be honest with you all. And I feel a little bit bad, but not that bad. I kind of think of color as more like a gateway drug or like a lure that sends us into all these underworlds of other kinds of histories and knowledges, tells us about colonization, social political power dynamics, all kinds of stuff. It's like a shadowy, grittier other world, but the color is such an important piece. And these ochres that I work with, they do make beautiful spectrum of natural colors and material color. So, like we were saying earlier, as joy is a form of resistance, these are legitimately joyful, radiant materials that we can witness and we can just purely experience as like a gateway drug into the vast histories that those lands hold. But I don't want to limit it to that part. I think it's really important to carry both the joy of it and also the pain that the land is carrying at this time. So this picture, just as a side note, is all soils and rocks that I gathered from actual places, and some of them are gathered by my friends, and they are a kind of research. So every time you see a pigment throughout this talk, each of those has some chemical research associated with it, story research, language research, things that go into trying to get to know each of these marks in time. And in a lot of the talks I've given, I just start going off about the spiritual nature of ochre. I'm like, I just want to get you inside the magic of this material, the history of this material. But I do realize that it really, sometimes people really crave a definition of what ochre is, what is pigment. So if you've read or skimmed through Book of Earth, you'll know that I make a lot of different attempts to define ochre in simple terms and in complex terms. But I usually want to, I kind of avoid the simple definitions, just because ochre and ochre-rich lands and places are really sacred and important to Indigenous cultures, peoples, many of my friends worldwide who are actively and currently revitalizing pigment practices in their own cultures and communities. And in our American Western culture, we tend to think about ochre as like definable as an iron oxide or definable as a certain material color and therefore usable. We also think about it as like, it's pigments we can buy at the store or we can gather from our little local park. And it's a great way to include ecologically sensitive approaches to our art practices. But the far older practices around ochre and the stories that I've heard from other people is that it's the right to gather ochre, to work with ochre is protected knowledge and has been for a long time. And so in ochre gathering and assembling and processing pigments, it has required in the past initiated access, being shown how to gather it by a living guide, knowing reciprocity protocols, how to take care of the land when you take something from the land. And there's still today a lot of places with ochre that have closed practices around them that you cannot access, especially as an outsider or a non-native person. And I say this because it's really important that we understand, or like at least start to get the gist that there's a huge responsibility when we're carrying pigment in our practices. And you might not even know that you've taken a pigment from a place that has a sacred meaning and history to someone else. Then there's also like, I don't have to get into all this, but there's also a lot of ochre places that have been lost over time that did have really powerful histories that I could have told you about, but now have been obviously mined out for the steel industry or covered over by a data farm or in someone's private land that they own a ton of guns and you can't go on that land. Things, all the not good things. But it's just to say that definitions of ochre haven't really changed over time, but the where and the how we approach the ochre as a cultural portal, it has changed. And we need to I want to just note that. And the reason I'm showing this picture while I'm kind of not defining ochre is because it's from my friends who are part of the Kaweraro collective. They're Maori earth pigment artists out of Aotearoa or New Zealand. And they are doing tons of work revitalizing earth pigment practices in their own communities. And this is one of the images that they use to define ochre, which says, in a teaspoon of dirt, a whole world. And I think it's one of the best definitions of ochre. So, and they've given me permission to share this with everyone. And let me play this. Okay, so on the other hand, I also just want to give you a hit of like what's on my Instagram folder of ochres around the world, because I keep this folder of just all the different ways that people on the planet engage with earth pigments and ochres. And there's this like very common connection that we all have. Yes, ochre has deep indigenous roots, and as humans, we've been using ochre for over 300,000 years. But also today, it's something that everyone's kind of seeking out and trying to play with and learning. And so these conversations are really wide and varied around how do we approach ochre. And I sometimes feel like, okay, if everyone in the world is trying to work with ochres, let's try to find like a 30-second quick definition of what ochre is to all of us so we can all have it in common. But I've come to realize that that itch to provide clean definitions of what ochre is actually a product and a construct of the colonial extractive data, need for data that we've internalized in the American colonial project. So I think there should be some things about ochre that maybe remain undefined. But as you can see, I mean, ochre is a material, it has specific properties. People do mix it with all kinds of things to make, for all kinds of purposes, to make paint, to make wall paint, that cute squirrel is covering his body with ochre. You know, so as body paint, there's all kinds of ways we use it. But okay, I will give you some Western definitions of ochre that are told at colleges today, especially in the art context. So in the art world, just so we're all on the same page, a lot of you might know this. I'm assuming this is going to be familiar to some people, and I just share it so that you can kind of walk through how I think about it and what motivated me to make these books. So in the art world, ochres, you know, tend to be known as the earth colors: sienna, yellow ochre, Armenian bole, and we think of them maybe as the subdued part of the color palette. Maybe there's a nod to traditional rock paintings or the ancient past, or maybe there's, you know, the kitschy article that comes out in the news every once in a while, like the oldest paint kit in the world was found today in this South African cave, and we've been, you know, working with ochre for 500,000 years today, and last week we thought it was 150,000 years. And essentially the point is ochre's been around with us forever. And then if you go to my friends who are scientists or medical researchers or archaeologists, they don't really define ochre the same way that artists do. They don't think about it on the color terms necessarily. They're thinking about it a lot more on the geologic terms and on the mineral terms. So they define ochre more as an earth material that generally contains iron and oxygen bound together in different ways. So they're called the iron oxides. You might, or iron hydroxides, you might know them as goethite or hematite, magnetite, biogenic ochre. All these terms are names for ochres. But my scientific colleagues think about them as a family, like a mineral species. And so they kind of think that the ochres co-evolved on Earth 3 billion years ago in collaboration with biological microbial species in the deep ocean. That's one way they think about ochres forming. So a lot of the hard mineral rocks we have today, 3 billion years later, used to be soft poop that microbes made that have hardened and gone through a lot of geologic processes over time that now we extract and use as pigment. But I think it's really interesting that both the art context gives us a certain amount of information, the scientific context gives us information, the indigenous-led context gives us a lot of information, and also keeps some information secretive. But that's just so you kind of get a flavor of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about this iron and oxygen rich set of pigments, which is only one tiny part of all the natural pigment worlds. I'm sure many of you know that, but just, I'm only talking about these iron and oxygen rich minerals. And all these colors you see here are all part of that family with iron in them. And these ochres are, I guess you could just call them colors of the earth. They're really the ones you can find right on the ground. They're the ones that are very available, partially because the iron cycle on earth in sediment and in the soil is such an important part of the top layers of the earth. And it's also a really important process of how the earth's inner life gets back up to the surface. So the whole cycle of earth relates to the iron process and oxygen process. But I also, in case no one kind of knows this, I just like to point out also that ochres are, yes, iron, oxygen, and they're made of land. I personally also think of them as each containing a soul or a spirit, but those elements are the exact same elements of Earth by mass. Like the most elements on the Earth by mass are number 1, iron, number 2, oxygen, number 3, silicone, which is essentially sand and land. So I always think about, another way to think about ochre is that it's a mirror or a window into the heart of the earth or into the planet as a whole. It's a kind of way we can touch a piece of this bigger story. And like I said, this is just another image of a lot of other pigments that I won't be talking about because they're all made of stuff that are not iron or oxygen. So there's plant-based pigments, there's toxic mineral-based pigments, there's all kinds of stuff out there. And this is from the Harvard Forbes pigment collection, which is quite a notorious collection for these other kinds of pigments. If you're curious about toxic things like chrome green or arsenic green, there's a cool story about arsenic green out there. Anyways. Okay, so this book, and I want to actually get into the book that I made. And if I start running a bit long, I might skip through a few things. I tried to kind of get this so that we'd land with maybe 10, 15 minutes for Q&A at the end, but we'll see how it goes. Just holler at me if you want to stop at some point early. Anyways, okay. So this is the commercial book, and I started working on this book to try to figure out a way to convey some of the power of ochre, to protect the lineages of ochre that are not going extinct, but becoming less and less known, of how to actually work with ochre in the land. What does it feel like? What is that process about? How do we know, how have humans been working with the land and creating color out of it? And so I chose a lot of photography throughout the book to kind of help you, the readers, or anyone else enter in to a landscape without a lot of context. So just trying to get this energetic hit of what a land feels like. And that was motivated by this artist book that I made, where I have spent a lot of time with these materials, applying them to the page, trying to have their energy become the primary thing that you're experiencing when you're looking at the book. It's really about how do you get the lands to translate as souls instead of as pure color or something, even though they're a color field. So you can kind of see the relationship. And I just wanted to bring the cover up because as I started going through the commercial book, one of the biggest challenges I had was, how do I get people to feel the presence of ochre when there isn't actually physical ochre available to be putting in a commercial book? And I mean, I guess I could have tried to put physical pieces of ochre with my hand inside of 10,000 or 15,000 or however many copies, but it was like, I couldn't fathom doing that. So what I tried to do is convey other aspects through subtle means. So the Book of Earth, the cover, has a really gritty texture, or lightly gritty texture, And the title is debossed, so you can really feel as if you're feeling the ground. And that's the same when you read in my artist book. Every page has a different texture, has a different feeling, and a lot of it has come out of my relationship with the ochres. So each one of these pieces I've spent time with. Here's one for example. Each one of these pieces, you know, I've spent time with. I've crushed up little pieces of it. I've smelled it. Maybe I've licked it. You know, I've tried to see and listen in all the senses that I can of how this ochre likes to become, likes to communicate. And so I'll crush up different ones differently, and then I'll apply them with different binders so that that ochre has the best chance of kind of whispering through on the page to someone. And how that works, I don't know. Again, like I said, is it successful in terms of communicating to anyone but me? It's hard. I don't know, but we have to try, right? And so, you know, as I'm talking through this talk, I realize I'm not actually going to tell you how to work with ochre in your own practice. This isn't a methodology moment for me. I'm not going to go through that as much as I think it would be fun to share how that goes. If you want to learn how to use pigments in your practice, more specifically, it's important to kind of learn from a teacher directly. So there, like I said, you can look on Pigments Revealed International. People teach classes. I teach field classes sometimes. I also sometimes teach online bigger classes that are more like 6 hours about how might you treat the process of taking a rock and turning it into dust and turning it into paint or ink or whatever. So in the book, if you want to look through it, there are notes on how to do that. This is an example of one. There's also recipes and things that kind of dose us with ways to figure out the method in a lived embodied way for yourself. And so this is a spread from the book. And another way that I attempted to try to let the ochres come through as communicators on their own terms was I made these sort of dimensional pages. These are like physical boxes that they're objects in themselves that I constructed for the book as kind of like physical poems. Like I was thinking about how to arrange pigment on a page so that you could almost read it like sentences or words, but also that they each were individual. And I was thinking a lot about this one psychologist, Felix Guattari, who was saying once he experiences words on a page like each their own angel kind of popping out and fighting each other, and sometimes they have knives, or maybe they're not angels. And I was sort of, I loved envisioning that when I was making these boxes to become pages, that maybe people would register them as a sort of language of sorts, or as angels of sorts, word angels. And just to point out these different kinds of ochres, in Book of Earth, I go through each kind of ochre in the family. So on the left here is biogenic ochre, which is ochre made from the ancient microbes. And on the right is green earth, which there's a couple different minerals, seladenite, glauconite, that make these, but they're a much more subtle ochre, and they have really cool powers that I talk about in the book, where they can help bury nuclear waste in the soil. And they're a really important pigment for the icon tradition, the Orthodox icon painting tradition, or they don't call it painting, they call it writing. So anyways, these are all just to show ways I tried to get these ochres to communicate for themselves, which is hard. And then I also, after kind of just showing them on their own, I really wanted to show how each of those ochres broke down into paint, just to demonstrate that and the difference. So all those swatches you see are the same as these minerals that you see. And then there's a little story about each of them in the book. And then in each chapter for every ochre, I talk about a meaningful way to think with that particular family member of ochre. So in this story, I was telling some of the story about nuclear waste burials using green earth, and I'm telling stories about some terminology around it, and they're more like wandering excavations of poetic meaning. Again, trying to, how does the soul of ochre want to come through in this moment? And sometimes the stories get kind of dark and they get meandering, but they all try to kind of come together, make coherent some aspect about ochre that you might not think about in terms of, ooh, is this green going to look cool on my painting of a saint or something? And I also managed to get in the book, as another effort, again, these actual close-ups of sediment that are just the land. It's not a metaphor, it's not an abstraction, it's not a painting, it's the soil. And this is the soil that holds nuclear waste down as it's trying to be buried, so that radioactivity doesn't go out into the water system or back up into the soil and percolate back up and irradiate the plants and things like that. But this is a green earth specific demonstration of what you would experience when you're quote unquote gathering green earth. You're in the presence of this incredible work of art that earth has already made, that's co-engineered with human hands. Like, we are working together here with the earth as in a much bigger picture. And just because we're talking about color, in the book, I do make note of the different colors that you can get out of a particular ochre, but it was my opportunity to play around with what that could mean. So these are some words I gave to that green earth that's used in nuclear burial and also in other places. So I thought, if I was looking at this ochre, how do you convey the term for the color of it, which also carries these other deeper meanings of it? And then in the Book of Earth, the little one, the pigment on the right is a piece of that soil that I tried to let it come out in a different way, let it come out in a more relaxed way. It's not doing the hard work anymore of holding down that nuclear waste. So it's a little bit more smooth and open. Okay, so that's just some content within the Book of Earth that I wanted to go through with you all. And I think, yeah, what I was hoping to do, because I'm here with book artists, was I haven't done this before. Instead of kind of telling more specific stories about ochre, which we can get into in the Q&A, I really want to share this way that these books came out to the world. And I think we all know that it's a challenging process where you share your books. Are they in galleries? Are they in people's homes? Are they hidden in the back corner of a library, or do they never see the light of day of anyone else but your like favorite cat or something? So when I released the commercial Book of Earth, I really wanted it to have a kind of extended field, like creating its own space to be received, kind of almost like an initiation for the book itself that was relevant to the content of the book. And this is a picture of a place that inspired me throughout the process of all of my ochre work. It's of a columbarium, or a mausoleum, in Oakland, California, that is where everybody takes cremated remains of their loved ones, and they, instead of putting them in urns or in the ground, they put them in books. So you can kind of see this close up. All these books, there's thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of these books in this place, are all filled with white ochre, essentially. So they're calcium carbonate remains of people, but those remains are a material that have been used in the pigment making world for a really long time. They're the pigments that, make our pages white. They're the pigments that make chalk. And yeah, they're also the pigments of the dead. But to me, this materiality of the dead in the form of a book, honoring the ancestral presence of someone, felt like it was a home place for ochres. I don't know how home place. I don't know what that is, but yeah. So when I released Book of Earth, I decided to release it in this columbarium. And in order to do that, I had to sign like that my book was the deceased one, and pay for this space to have my book, my funeral for my book. And this was, on the right is the space, and on the left is me and a woman, my friend Deja Gold, who came to speak at the event, which I'll get into in a second. But the whole event was inside this columbarium, and I did it as a ritual performance. So I did readings from the book, but I also had people in the audience processing white earth in the form of cement or concrete, and then offering it to this urn that would be later deposited on the ground around the columbarium. And at the same time, I had a film playing. I just want to kind of acknowledge that the book itself is one thing, but it's connected to these places that have a whole lot of other stories, which the book wasn't able to tell. I didn't have permission to tell that story in the book from them. And I didn't have permission to tell a lot of other stories in the book. And so if you do get this book or you get interested in ochres, just know that there's a lot more to what might be given in the text or even told in a teaching. And then I also when I released the book, I am processing all these ochres down into a gray ochre. We're trying to process the cement and break it down so that the land can kind of come back out. And my friends who run a paint company and an art supply company in the Bay Area, they made this incredible paint out of many different ochres that became this gorgeous gray that to me was like, that's the perfect color for my culture in this moment. And for ochres, it's like I guess it's like a Payne's gray in a way, but it was this, I loved the feeling of the ochres all kind of becoming one tone or one letter. Oh, and I just wanted to, in terms of how extended this book offering is in trying to communicate ochre's own voices, you can see the pants I'm wearing. My friend, who's this incredible queer body sovereignty activist and weaver, Noel Guetti, they made me these pants that look like an ochre strata that they wove out of natural cotton, that they dyed in ICAT and in ICAT patterns, that they wanted to have as another way to show ochre that we're listening to them, by even just showing when I'm walking around doing book talks or whatnot, that the way that geology carries time in different stratas is demonstrated just in a pattern in a weaving. So I loved that there was just these little secret elements that extend how the book is communicating in my own perception. So I think what I'm going to do is maybe I'll sort of wrap up a little. We can just see if there's some questions and explore. And then if you want, I could also tell a couple stories from the book if no one has questions, but it might be a good opportunity for us to just start having conversation after this slide. But this one I just wanted to end on as to show you kind of, here's the pants, and then here's what actual stratas in the land look like that carry a lot of ochres. And these images are both in the book. And these, to me, these are ways that I really think ochre demonstrates that it's a kind of earth language, or it's a kind of earth logic. Like, they're telling the story of earth. They're the keepers of the stories of earth. They're the original grammar, maybe, of the planet. And I just feel like seeing these kinds of images gets us to kind of recognize that the stories are held in these lands, places, and in the individual pieces of place that we carry with us. And they also do carry the dead in all these stratas. They carry dead bodies that have been recycled over and over and over again and transformed into these minerals. And so when we're working with earth pigments, we're also always working with hundreds and millions of other bodies that have lived other lives. And I guess in that way, I kind of think about ochres as this entrance into a tomb in one sense, but like a tome of the earth in another sense. And maybe another way to think about it on book art terms is that the land is like the first and the last author, in that perspective. So anyways, these are just some thoughts to think about, to think with. We can dive into more practical things if you'd like. As I said, kind of avoid those sometimes, but I'm happy to field questions in that regard since I am here. And if there's any other questions or things you want to, topics you want to explore, particular ochres you want to talk about, a lot of people like the blue ochres, things like that.
This is such a basic question, but I'm always fascinated by how people get to a certain place, and you're all in, and I'm wondering, was there like a moment that was a tipping point when you entered this world in the way that brought you here?
Yeah, I mean, and I was living in Oakland, and I was in grad school at the philosophy and religion program. And after that, or during that time period and before that and after that, I had had a lot of dreams and also kind of experiences in meditation where ochre was just coming through. And I didn't know what that term meant at the time. And I also kind of had this foggy notion, like a lot of artists do, of what you're like, ochre? I don't care about ochre. What's that? But it was kind of coming through so strongly that I was holding it with a kind of curiosity. And then this one dream came through, and it just was a dream of a place. It was very specific. It was like a map, but I was walking it. And that I just felt that was a real place. And I walked all around. I did Google searches for something similar. And eventually, like the long story short is I found myself walking on a path in the Oakland Hills that was the exact path of the dream. It led to all these ochres that were hidden away there. The ochre started talking, kind of showing different colors, different stratas, and they also started teaching me about the importance and the presence of Deja, her family, this whole indigenous history of that area that I had no idea at the time about. So it was really the ochres kind of, I think about it, they called out to me, they wanted me to kind of start working with them. And from there, it was really a very slow evolution of me being a student of the land and trying to learn from all the aspects of it. Yeah.
It seems like you've accomplished so much and still being a young person. So it's fascinating to think where this will take you, over a lifetime. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a lifetime kind of work.
So there's a question about binders, and Jan Ward is asking, do you find the binders carry as deep a connection as the pigments, as the earth pigments?
That's a cool question. I wanted to bring that up actually. I'm not a very plant person. Like I'm like just this ochre iron obsessed person. I don't know why. I don't know why that's given to me. But what I have learned being in all these landscapes and that's really important about binders, is that the binder plants will grow with the ochres that they want to bind with. So for example, in a lot of ochre places, like in Australia, the main sap tree will grow right there. And so they have been cultivated to grow there. That's, I don't know all that information. So there's kind of this deep history of relationship with the trees that make the sap being in the land, the plants that make the oils that maybe are antifungal when you mix the ochre with the water. So the essential oil plants, like I'm thinking about in the Aegean, in the Mediterranean, some of their huge ochre-rich islands all have mastica bushes growing out of them. And mastica is this amazing gum. It smells so good. It's an incredible binder. It makes an incredible, also like alcohol-based ink. You can distill it, but it grows all in the ochres. And it's like, oh, we just love this. And so it's sort of like, you start reading the landscape like this and you realize that a lot of the binder, like what we're doing as humans is essentially taking things that are already working together, already in symbiotic connection, separating them, forgetting, and then being like, oh, look, we can put them back together. And you're like, they were already together.
So it's a symbiotic,
And I'm not saying this is the case for everything, but it's enough there that it's a cool part of something to think about. Like, and in the opposite terms, there's often ocean-based animals whose oil in their body make incredible binders And you think it has nothing to do with ochre, because where's the ochre in the sea? But it turns out that there are these huge accumulators of iron in the water, and that their whole bodies are relating to the liquid form of ochre. So there's a lot of subtleties to this, and mysteries. Yeah, I love that question. But there's people with plant knowledge that could tell you so much more than I can about some of the like what powers are in the binders, what the soul of each of those plants can do on those other terms.
Yeah. And Jesse, Wing, and Marta have a two-part question. Wonderful translation, thanks. Where are the blue ochres from? And then Marta asks, any especially good ochre sources in the United States?
Yeah, both of those are the blue ochre. I'll start with that one. That's a material that I've really learned the most about from my mentor, Melanie Anchetta. She kind of revitalized the knowledge around blue ochre, because blue ochre is really important along the coast from here, Coast Salish land, all the way up to the northern northwest coast, Yupik, and farther north into the Arctic Circle. So all along the coast, there's different kinds of connection to Vivianite is the Western term, but there's a lot of different terms for blue ochre. And it's, as someone who's kind of, I'm like her Sherpa kind of to go get the blue ochres. I don't really gather them for myself because of the nature of that material's history, but I gather them for her research and for revitalizing it. And what I've noticed in the land is that Vivianite absolutely will not show herself to you unless you're within touching distance. It's this incredible thing. You know, oftentimes we think about, oh, where's ochre? Like, how can I see it? Oh, it's this huge rainbow right there in front of you. And you're like, this other ochres, like they are hiding in plain sight all the time. And so that's something about blue ochre that's really special and unique about its character. It also starts white deep in the soil, and it only exposes itself and turns blue once it's in the air and in the sunlight. So it has this really transformative color property too. And then, yes, in the United States, there's so much ochre out there, and there's a lot of ochre, like I said, that's highly prized and protected by the indigenous communities that live in that place of the ochre. And there's a lot of ochres that are kind of, the whole like dirt road is made of a decent soil that you can refine into ochre that doesn't have the same kind of significance as some of these places do. So yeah, there's ochre everywhere. I mean, just if there's iron anywhere, there's ochre. And there's iron in this, like pretty much all kinds of soils, because iron is the tracker of, it basically isn't any sediment.
And one more question. Jane is reminding us that we should wrap up, but let's look at Paige. I'm so inspired and a fan of your work. How do you document your field work, and how do you know where to look and how to identify ochre in nature?
Well, you know, one form of documenting my work is making something like these books, which is to me documenting the watershed that I live in just by marking it on the page. And then other times in the past, I've documented it through more classic scientific methods, like grinding a tiny bit, putting it in a vial, labeling it, writing in my notebook, you know, number da-di-da, this is from here, this is from here. Oh, we did chemical analysis on it for this one project. It's made of Fe2O3 plus CaCO da-di-da. And then other times I don't. That's so I'm gathering, you know, I'm gathering in the field. That's a form of physical documentation. And then there's times when I do photographic documentation that is, yeah, I don't mind doing that. More and more I don't do that, just because there's just so many layers of letting the land just be alone, like leaving it alone. Like we do way too much destruction and moving of earth as humans. So it's more I'm more interested in documenting through witnessing these days. Maybe taking a mark in the place that I'm in and leaving the mark in the place, so that maybe if someone else walks by, they might be like, oh, there's something in this place. for me myself to also witness.
Did you take the photographs? I'm going to slip that question in.
Yeah, it's a kind of equal measure of myself, my partner, who's a photographer, helping me, and then colleagues of mine who've been in places that I haven't been, and then photographers who have incredible capacity to photograph land, who I was like, I'm gonna hire you to get to have these photos in the book if you're okay with that. So it was a mix of all of it in order to do that, conveying land that like I didn't know. Yeah, I couldn't do all that myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Heidi.
Oh, thanks for having me. And I'm excited for you guys to keep exploring this topic in so many different ways. It's such a rich place to get, invested in, and so much to learn. Like I'm always shocked about every time I hear someone talk about color or material color or any of this stuff. I'm just, this is endless. So.
And Heidi's website is called Early Futures, and you can use her name to find it. But I love that play on words, Early Futures.
Yeah, I think I'm going to keep that one for a while. I like it too.
Heidi, this is Jane, and Suzanne, thank you so much for bringing Heidi to our conversation. I have so many thoughts and reflections. I've learned so much, and I go back to that first quote about so much to be found in the teaspoon of dirt. And I really admire and appreciate the reflections that we should all have about the earth and how we treat what comes from the earth. And your work is just fascinating. And I also want to compliment you on the book itself. It's absolutely beautiful. And Suzanne, those photographs are just beautiful. So thank you so much, Heidi. So much to think about in terms of pigments, color, geology, and our environment. And we so value your contributions. And I have so many notes here about sources, Suzanne, for us to explore in the future.
Yes.
And I also want to bring everyone's attention to Suzanne's presentation that is going to be on May 15th, which will no doubt have some references to your own work, Heidi, and of course, exploring Suzanne's incredible artistic and creative skills. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm going to go outside and think and reflect and walk in our beautiful earth. And I just want to thank you so much. Suzanne, great job. And it's so wonderful to have you at our lunch table.
Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lori, too.
Thanks for all the work.
Thank you, Lori.